I want to say welcome again. We have some people still just jumping in. My name is Shauna Morin, and I am a research fellow at Interfaith Youth Corps. I'm happy to be facilitating this event today. And my role at IFIC in particular relates to the Interfaith Diversity Experiences and Attitudes Longitudinal Survey, or IDEALS. And some of you on the call might be familiar with IDEALS. This is a study that we were a part of from 2015 to 2019 in conjunction with researchers at Ohio State University and North Carolina State University. And IDEALS really focused on a cohort of students nationally from their first year of college through their fourth year of college. And we surveyed those students at 3 different time points to get a sense of their experience of the college climate, particular interactions they had in and out of the classroom, formally and informally, with respect to interfaith activities. And then we measure a host of outcomes as well. So we're looking for student growth over their years in college on things like a commitment to bridging religious divides, religious literacy, and appreciative attitudes toward people who have different beliefs or worldview perspectives than they do. I'm going to talk a little bit more in a few minutes about how IDEALS informed today's session, but just broadly speaking, we are excited this year, all year long, to be sharing findings from IDEALS, and this virtual event is one of the spaces in which we are talking a little bit more deeply about what we saw over the course of those 4 years of college in terms of students' interfaith engagement and outcomes. So with that in mind, I want to briefly mention that, of course, as you all know, we're here to talk specifically about curricular experiences and interfaith competencies in the workplace today. We're looking at 3 fields in particular: STEM, business, and the health professions. And we're really pleased to have 3 outstanding panelists from our network of faculty colleagues at IFIC joining us. First, we have Michael Burns, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Biology at Loyola University Chicago. We have Barbara McGraw, professor of social ethics, law, and public life, as well as the director of the Center for Engaged Religious Pluralism at St. Mary's College of California. And we have Joset Brown, assistant professor in the Department of Nursing at William Patterson University. So we're thrilled to have them with us today to share their insights from their respective fields. And before we jump into the program, I'd love to just get a sense of who else is with us. So if you might utilize your reaction buttons in Zoom, if I could get a sense of how many folks here today have some affiliation in the STEM fields or an interest in this work in the STEM fields. Great, glad to see that. How about anyone who is in the business field or interested in doing more of this interfaith work in business? See a few hands up there, wonderful. And lastly, the health professions. Who do we have on the call who's interested in learning more about this work in the health professions? Excellent. All right, well, we should have a really rich and robust conversation today, given the diversity of experiences and expertise in the space. So without further ado, we're going to jump into a little bit of a background here. All right. So one of the driving things that we were thinking about in planning for this event today was born of a recently released set of data from the Public Religion Research Institute, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that studies the intersection of religion, culture, and public policy. And PRI recently shared that a majority of Americans indicate frequently interacting with people who don't share their political party or religion at work. And in fact, we see that many Americans are interacting across faiths or with folks who are religiously diverse in their workplaces more than they are in any other context of their lives. And so with that in mind, we really wanted to trouble or investigate a little bit what that means in terms of preparing to be competent in those spaces and in those interactions. And so in turning to the IDEAL study that I mentioned a little while ago, we took a look specifically at what the experiences were and the outcomes were for students based on their field of study. You can go ahead and change the slide. Thanks, Catherine. So one of the things that we talk about in our national report from the Ideal Study across the board is that less than 1/3 of students say that they developed a deeper skill set to bridge religious divides during college. So 70% of students that we talked to were committed to doing this kind of work, which is really promising. We're of course excited to see that there's not only a high level of commitment to working across difference among students in terms of their value set, but also that grows over time. But not so many students feel that they're equipped for this type of work. And so that really raises a question about what kinds of experiences students might be missing out on in college that give them that set of tools or a space in a safe context with guidance to practice using those tools. And in fact, when we look at that 32%, we see that number dip even lower when we look at business students and students in the STEM fields, who were the least likely among any of the students we surveyed to say they had developed an interfaith skill set while in college, with only 27% responding to that question affirmatively. Another question we asked that perhaps was even more striking to us in this regard was that the vast majority of students, when asked if they had ever reflected on why interfaith cooperation was relevant to their field of study, indicated that they had never done so. So while 86% seems pretty high in its own right, we saw that that number was even higher for business majors. 93% of business majors said that they had never reflected on why interfaith cooperation was relevant to their field of study. Interestingly, and sort of counterintuitively, 85% of those students said that they had taken a course that focused on exploring diverse cultures, experiences, or worldviews. And this was on par with their peers in the arts and sciences, in religion, and in education, where you might expect that students are having that conversation or having that reflective moment a little more regularly. So there's something going on here where business students are being exposed to ideas around diverse identities in different ways, but they're not necessarily making the connection between why taking a course like that might be useful or important as they prepare for a future career. When we looked at health profession students and STEM students in terms of enrolling in courses similar to that, courses that explore diverse cultures, experiences, and worldviews, the numbers were much lower. So 68% of health profession students and 66% of STEM students had said they had enrolled in a course of that nature. I mentioned in my introduction about the Ideal Study that we look at a variety of different outcomes, including a short measure, sort of a mini quiz that we conduct in the survey that looks at religious literacy. In particular, it looks at students' understanding of specific positive facets or positive individual leaders of different worldview traditions, whether religious or non-religious. And so we measure students' improvement or growth on that literacy quiz over time. And what we found was that students in business and the health professions in particular are not gaining the necessary knowledge to navigate a religiously diverse workplace based on the findings from that religious literacy measure. 45% of business students and 39% of health students scored a C grade or better on that 8-item religious literacy quiz. So of course, we'd like to see that more students in these fields would be scoring a little bit higher on that knowledge of different worldview traditions. In STEM and in the health professions, students exhibited some of the lowest rates of participation in experiences where we might see or hope that they would be gaining some of that literacy. So we asked students if they've ever enrolled in a course that explores diverse cultures, experiences, or worldviews, as I mentioned before, but we also asked more broadly about formal academic engagement. So have you ever taken a class where you were hoping to learn more about a particular worldview or just about worldview diversity in general? Have you ever participated in a class project? Have you ever been part of a case study that looked at a topic of religious diversity? And these sorts of experiences that happen in the classroom were happening at really low levels among STEM and health profession students relative to their peers. Students in the health professions and in STEM, we also noted when you think about that connection between these college experiences and their outcomes, that they were showing up below average in what we call our pluralism measure, or our measure of a commitment to bridging religious divides. And so you see all these pieces sort of interacting here. If students are not having an opportunity to learn more about different religious and non-religious traditions, it may translate into not having that same level of appreciation or commitment to working across those differences in their lives, both during and after college. And so really, that's where the opportunity lies to think about how we might create more of those opportunities in curricular spaces, particularly in these fields that we're talking about today. So the last thing I want to share is actually not specific to the ideal study, but was again born from what we were seeing in the findings. This past fall, I had conversations with a number of IFYC alumni network members. So these are individuals who, when they were college students, were highly engaged in interfaith leadership opportunities on their campuses, but who have now graduated and moved on into their various careers, but have stayed connected with IFYC. So we're talking about a particular pool of students here who see the value of interfaith and are looking for opportunities to leverage that. But I had some questions for them about what they would say have been the relevant applications of their interfaith skills and expertise developed in college now that they're out there in the workforce. And you can see here, I won't read these quotes directly, but you can see here kind of a variety of responses to that question of how they've used their interfaith skill set in the workplace. And what I found that was interesting is a cross-section of sort of inward-facing and outward-facing reasons. So at the top of the slide there, you see one of our alumni sharing that their interfaith skill set was really particularly valuable for them in thinking about how to work with communities that they serve. So how do I plan events and gatherings? How do I participate in the work that I do with clients or with constituents who are involved with the work that I do on an external basis? But then we also heard this importance of building community and getting to understand better and listen better to colleagues, and sort of that internal facing experience of understanding both similarities and differences, and developing a way to sort of strengthen those relationships for the betterment of the work organizationally. And finally, I think this quote that you see on the bottom right really captures what we hope to see in the longer term of sort of not just doing the work to get up to a level of competence to kind of do your job, but adding on the value of why not do more? Why not take advantage of this opportunity? I'm in a workspace, as we saw at the beginning, that PRI study. I'm in a workspace where I'm interacting with people who don't think the way that I do, and we are interacting together on a sustained way. Why not take advantage of these different perspectives and learn more and try to learn from each other? And so really wanting to see people move along that continuum of seeing not only how interfaith competencies can help you do the work that you need to do, but can also help, take you above and beyond that to a place of just ongoing lifelong learning and civic pluralism. So with that all in mind as our backdrop, I'm very excited to turn the conversation over to our panelists. And we're gonna start today by inviting each panelist for about 5 to 7 minutes or so to share, first of all, why they feel that interfaith competencies are relevant to their field of study. And secondly, how they are making the case for interfaith, either in their departments or in their institutions or in their fields generally. So while many of us on this call find an inherent value in doing this type of work, we also recognize that sometimes it's necessary to be able to make a more pragmatic case. And so we're inviting these individuals today to talk very much so about that pragmatic case and how you can sort of justify and make the argument for colleagues and critics alike of what is really the practical relevance of being able to interact effectively across worldview differences in these various fields. So without further ado, I will pass the mic over to Michael to get us started. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Burns. That's me. There's my first slide. This is exciting. So the big question is, why are interfaith competencies relevant in STEM? There's sort of two approaches you can think about this. So if you're looking at just a group of scientists themselves are relatively homogenous, just like anybody else in terms of their belief structure. And one thing that is a little bit tricky is that if you work in a lab, you work in lab long hours, you talk to people about everything, but one topic that's typically a little touchy is religion. Like, you'll even talk politics in lab a lot of times, but religion gets a little touchy. maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe you should actually try to train your students how you interact with other people in a productive way so that you're not stepping on anybody's toes, you're not excluding anybody, because we also know that one of the values of diversity is that a diverse team tends to have fewer blind spots in terms of solving problems. And so that's a very easy pitch to say. Like, if you want to actually be functional and get things done most effectively, you want to take on board the value of diversity and interfaith disciplines. That's one side of it. The second side of it is that scientists, you're not actually doing your job unless you're communicating with everybody else what you found out or what your recommendations could be. And right now, this is incredibly pressing because the Anthropocene, the era of time that we're living in right now, is incredibly dangerous. There's all sorts of stuff that's happening right now that's incredibly important that we get the public on board, because the public helps shape governmental policies and international policies. And scientists need to be able to communicate with the general public about these things. And a lot of times scientists tend to live in a bubble. So if you're familiar with any of the statistics on the beliefs of scientists religiously versus the general public, you may also be familiar that most scientists are typically considered apatheists, as in it's not that they're necessarily don't hate religion or love religion. It's that they don't see that religion is reflected in any way relevant to their work for the most part. This is broad sweeping strokes, by the way, so don't take my word for it. They'll go look at the stats. What that means is that they tend to ignore the interfaith or the ways that the public might respond to some of the things that they say, and they need to take that on board. And as an example of that, if you could go to the next slide. Here is a quote by a fellow: human-caused global warming is a threat to the human species. And you may recognize who this guy is. This is Richard Dawkins. He's a good scientist. He's written some brilliant work back in the day. Is that the first thing that pops into your head when you see a picture of Richard Dawkins? Probably not, I'm guessing. If anybody knows who he is, he tends to also be sort of a vitriolic anti-theist, right? He's a hardcore atheist. He's written all sorts of books on the topic. He wrote The God Delusion. I would say that, he has his place and he does things well, but he is not what I would call a bridge builder. So if you wanted to put somebody at the front of your podium to say, this is the person who we need communicating to the public about the importance of something that is factually backed by science, which is that global warming is a threat to the humanity, maybe not this guy, right? Why? Because he's got really poor interface skills, okay? On the converse side of things, you think of the best science educators you can think of are science communicators, people like Carl Sagan or Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye. Curiously enough, they're all functionally atheists. None of them express a belief in God, but they're exquisitely sensitive to the fact that that might rub people the wrong way. And so they try to do things in a way that negotiates the touchiness of interfaith dialogue, because what they care about is communicating science. And if you want to get this across to your STEM students, this should, again, be sort of foremost for why you would do it. All right, next slide. Thank you. All right, so what's the case? So what's the case that I've made for interfaith programming, start targeting STEM students on campus? The plan of action I took, and it seemed to work for me, so maybe try it yourself, is finding faculty who disagree with you religiously but have similar goals. Why is this important? If you happen to be a religious person, let's say you're a Christian, and you want to do some interfaith programming, or you want to do some religion-based programming, it might come across the wrong way to students. People are going to get a little suspicious if it's you and your 5 buddies from Bible study getting together to say, we're going to push this thing. Why? Well, because it's a little monolithic and people are going to be a little touchy about it. In my case, the best success we've had is I'm not a believer. I'm not a religious person myself. I found a fellow who's a Catholic, and we disagree. And we discovered that if we really like arguing about stuff, and we said, why not argue about this stuff in a good faith way, like friends, but get students involved in the process. It seemed to work. We seem to be able to draw in a diverse crowd of students because none of the students feel like either one of us is going to get away sort of pushing our own agenda, because there's sort of a model for how that diversity works. The second thing is to figure out what the students are interested in. So if my colleague and I are interested in something, but none of the students are interested, you're not going to have everybody show up. No one's going to register for the course. No one's going to come to the webinar, nothing. So you got to figure out what they want, what they're interested in. And one way to do that is just to poll them. Here's a list of topics we could argue about, or we could get a guest speaker on. What do you think would be interesting? And then the third thing is to find support from somewhere. If you're familiar with IFYC, there's a perfectly good chance IFYC might be a place to get support from it. We were able to get support internally from the College of Arts and Sciences. So we convinced our dean that this was something that was useful to do by basically just writing a one-page letter saying, this is what we want to do. This is why it's in line with the mission. And then a very small ask, like give us some money for coffee and cookies and or pizza or something once in a while. We got it from the Center for Experiential Learning here. We're talking about how Interfaith is excellent. We've also gotten money from the John Templeton Foundation. We have applications out at the National Science Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, because the National Endowment for Humanities has this thing called the Connections Grant, where they're trying to get people from humanities and the STEM to talk to each other, and the National Science Foundation. I'm super excited. Hopefully a bunch of these grants go through. But in the short term, what we're doing is next fall, we have a pair of co-taught courses on co-taught between the philosophy department and the biology department, where we're taking, this is a long, hard sell. We're having the students take 2 courses simultaneously, back to back. They have to enroll in both. We're going to be doing co-teaching for all of them, which was, again, a tough sell with the administration, but we pushed it through. The students are going to be reading science fiction texts. They read the science fiction texts. We've selected them for they're having some science in there, some biology that we can sink our teeth into in terms of like, when we want to dig into the nitty gritty of how like genetic engineering works or something like that, we can actually learn about like CRISPR-Cas9 and talk about the genome and genetic engineering. And then in the philosophy side, we can actually talk about interfaith stuff. We can talk about how might people answer the ethical questions surrounding genetic engineering from a variety of perspectives, right? And in this case, it's like the epitome of what a liberal arts education should be, which is not just that you're learning the core concepts of how this stuff works in STEM, but you're also looking at the bioethical principles from a variety of frameworks. That's what we've got going right now in the short term. That's where we're at. I'd love to, when we go to our breakout rooms, if you have any questions for me, that'd be great. I'd love some feedback. And also, if you guys are doing cool stuff, I'd love to hear about that as well. Thank you. That's all I've got.
Thank you so much, Michael. And we're going to turn it over next to Barbara McGraw.
Hi, I'm not going to start with slides, so you might want to put your screen on speaker view so you see me a little bigger. I'm just going to launch right in and say, you know, we look around the world and we see that religion can be a source of conflict, but we also know that it can be a source of cooperation and understanding. And that's a major reason why today we need leaders in all professions who can be part of the solution while actually helping to get the work of the profession done in a better way. And so from my perspective, interfaith engagement and interfaith leadership are both aspirational and practical. And so I want to look, for example, at business, which is what I've mostly been asked to talk about, and where my programs are at 3 levels. The first level is the one people in the interfaith community talk about the most, which is religious literacy and building cooperation. And this level is very important in business because when it is attended to, people of all faiths and worldview can bring their whole selves into the workplace. And companies are beginning to recognize how important this is to employee morale and work satisfaction, as well as the bottom line. It helps to create a sense of belonging and identity that fosters and celebrates pluralism as a value and an achievement. And for example, Salesforce has several employee research groups that celebrate various aspects of diversity, one of which is for religions and other worldviews, because atheists and humanists count too, right? So Salesforce's group is called Faith Force and focused very much on that first level. The second level is religious accommodations. While the law varies around the world, in the US, however, the law requires accommodation of religious practices in the workplace unless such accommodations would be an undue hardship, which is a term of art in the law, on the employer. So having a pretty good understanding of various religions' practices and why they are important is a good thing, to say the least. The right to religious liberty accommodations in the workplace was reinforced and extended in a 2015 case where the Supreme Court held that Abercrombie and Fitch was required to give an accommodation to a Muslim woman who they failed to hire because of her hijab. The court said Abercrombie had to give the hijab accommodation regardless of the company's required dress code. So in that instance, doing so was not deemed by the Supreme Court to be an undue hardship. The third level is about better management. And this is something I talk a lot about in my courses and programs on interfaith leadership. And that is the link between the deep value roots of a nation or region's traditional religion and how that is a significant foundation for culture. So today, you know, as you all know, US businesses are expanding, engaging in partnerships and supply chains all around the world. And so it's no longer enough to look only at what I call the artifacts of culture. You know, they do this, they eat that, etc. Rather, understanding the deep value roots of culture in the traditional religion of a region or nation, regardless of whether the individual people are all adherents of that religion, by the way, give those doing business a much deeper appreciation of why people in different cultures think and do the things they do. And it's important to recognize that the world is coming here to US businesses as well. People from all over the world bring their deep value roots in the traditional religion of their home country into our diverse US workplaces. And understanding this is very important for managing effective teams, as people from all around the world bring very different religio-cultural perspectives about things like communication and what constitutes good leadership and followership, among other things. And this is really important. Those of us from the US need to recognize that our emphasis on continuous, unremitting hard work and our values of efficiency and productivity are rooted in our own deep value roots of the Protestant work ethic and are not necessarily the only right way to do things. So the way I see it, there are 4 overall purposes of interfaith leadership in business. And really in all professions, if you think about it. Purpose 1, to build inclusive organizations and teams for cooperative and effective achievement of professional goals. So becoming an interfaith leader who understands diverse religions as well as the deep cultural roots based on them is critical for creating cooperative teams who can work together to achieve common goals and do it well. Purpose 2, to foster a deeper understanding and appreciation of faith differences and those religio-cultural differences. And when we understand those deep religious value roots of culture, we can build more capacity to appreciate where everyone is coming from and to value their perspectives on how to work together to achieve common goals. And then we understand much better how to bring the best out of people by being able to meet them where they really are. Purpose 3, to leverage difference for multi-perspectival approaches to identifying and achieving goals and for creative cognitive flexibility. Okay, so what am I talking about here? Well, I'm talking about appreciation of diverse perspectives can help a team think outside the box. It can help teams overcome monoculture and groupthink, which is the death knell for creativity. And purpose 4, to contribute to make a more cooperative, harmonious, and safer world. And I often say, you know, in many ways, business runs the world. If business isn't part of the solution, there will be no solution. So business in particular, but frankly, all professions have an opportunity to employ interfaith leadership and interreligious understanding that galvanizes people of all religions in mutual respect and equal dignity to achieve professional goals while serving all their constituents well. And that is going to contribute to making the world a better place. It can't help but do that. So just briefly, how did I make the case at my institution? Well, I said what you just heard. And I practice interfaith leadership in selling this to the rest of the institution. And my approach involves a collaborative leadership style based on James McGregor Burns's transforming leadership method, which is inclusive of everyone and focuses on worthy purposes, shared values, constituent needs, and the articulation of positive transformational goals. And I also did some practical things like, of course, tying it to the institution's mission and also the core curriculum. And interestingly enough, it wasn't that hard of a sell to our dean at the School of Economics and Business and other people across the campus. So thank you very much. And I'm also looking forward to our breakout room to talk about this more.
Thank you so much. I'm encouraged to hear that that was an easy sell. So those of you who are interested in a deeper dive on the business front can learn more in that breakout room. And we'll turn to our final panelist next, Dr. Joset Brown, to talk to us about her experiences in the health professions.
Hi, everyone. I am Joset Brown, and I'm a faculty member at William Patterson University in New Jersey. I like how Shauna introduced the role as trying to make the case for the practical relevance of interfaith collaboration and cooperation in health sciences, because for me, that is exactly what this journey has been. So ethics and culture are classes that are offered and required for healthcare professionals, but religious diversity is not. In general, we as educators in the health professional field must prepare caregivers to interact and have dialogue with their clients and other providers who present with cultures, religions, and beliefs which often differs from our own. We often underplay the role that religion and faith has in the lives of our patients and their healing process, and the role that religious literacy plays in the provider's ability to provide comprehensive care. We place emphasis, as caregivers, we often place the most emphasis on the pathophysiology and physical symptoms, and we ignore their belief systems and how it impacts how patients and people in general live and approach health and healthcare. Often it's an afterthought until something catastrophic occurs or an end-of-life decision has to be made. That's when we're like, oh, well, what is their faith-based belief and how can we incorporate that when we had the opportunity to do so from earlier on? As healthcare providers, we must encourage and normalize behaviors that no longer separates the illness from the person, but provide care in a comprehensive, inclusive, and practical way. Behaviors that respect and understand how our patients apply their spirituality, their faith, or lack thereof, and their belief systems in how they seek, how they access, and how they adhere to care, including how we as healthcare providers can accommodate them during their contact with us, whether that be for a brief time in the emergency room or for a prolonged hospitalization. It is often difficult to relate and interact with a faith or a belief or with somebody who does not share the same belief system as we do, or that is different from ours or is foreign to us because we don't know. And oftentimes we make judgments or we compare to our own belief because we think that it's the norm or the expectation or the only way. In a time when we as a nation are addressing diversity and inclusion, it is the opportune time to have these conversations and for us as educators to revise our curriculums to address the patient as a whole. We claim to practice patient-centered care, and it is in its truest sense that we really view the patient from every standpoint and not just a physical standpoint. how I've made the case for the change in my department is first to get buy-in. And it was interesting when Barbara said, I teach a whole course on this. And I'm like, how'd you get that done? Like, that's great. And you would think that nurses having to care for patients at some of their deepest, darkest times, that this would be something that we enforce. Surprise, we don't. And so it wasn't surprising for me when Shauna mentioned in the ideal study that healthcare professionals were, responding in such low numbers. So the first was to get buy-in, and believe it or not, this was very new buy-in, because I guess we accepted, or we thought that, well, some other department was responsible for this. Maybe the ethics department, maybe science, maybe somebody else was responsible for this. And I'm just here to teach nursing care. So it's new, one level at a time. So first it was to identify that there is a need, that it really is our collective responsibility, and to identify where it fits. And truthfully, it should be threaded throughout the curriculum. It's not just one level's responsibility, it's all our responsibilities. Even when these nurses graduate and they go into their new graduate programs, like who's having these conversations with these nurses? I feel like if we show interest and we as faculty are invested, then it spills over into our work and our students. So it doesn't become a choice. My arguments essentially is nurse educators are poised to start these conversations and increase religious and spiritual literacy in healthcare, as we're with the patients more often than anybody else. If we persistently engage in these conversations throughout the curriculum, then what was once uncomfortable now becomes the new norm. It's such an uncomfortable thing for us to engage in conversations with people whose faith is different from our own, and it shouldn't be. Religious identity and diversity is no longer a nice to know topic, but a need to know fundamental issue of life and social healthcare interaction. Integrating these processes of accepting, respecting, communicating about, including, and integrating a patient's belief becomes a part of our conversation, a part of our plans of care. And nurses know what plans of care are, right? We plan a care for a patient. We should be including religious identity in these conversations and not just have it as an afterthought. Now, this does not mean that we will know all the things about all the religious entities, but it means that we become acutely aware of the faith of others. We become acutely aware specifically of the religious needs of our patients and the role it plays in healthcare behaviors. We become more respectful of the faith that others practice, and more likely to integrate faith-based care and faith-based practices to respectfully engage with our patients, to support adherence, improve health, and promote healing of our diverse populations, both inside and outside of the healthcare environments, to enrich our interactions with each other as a people. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to having these conversations in the breakout rooms.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joset. That was particularly feeling salient right now in the midst of this pandemic and all the work that healthcare providers are doing, and that level of skill and competency and sensitivity is so vital. So I don't want to detract us at any degree from these small groups. I want to make the most use of the time we have left. So we're excited today to be testing out a new Zoom feature where you can opt into a breakout room. So I'm going to ask two things. One is that you choose a group either with health professions, business, or STEM, and you can see on the screen there which group is which, and our panelists will be in those respective rooms. I'm going to ask my colleague Carolyn to join group 1 and my colleague Maya to join group 2, and I'll join group 3. We will be taking good notes as scribes on behalf of IFYC so that we can capture the ideas that are generated in these discussions, and hopefully they will give you a chance to briefly chat about some more concrete strategies for implementing this work in your campus curricula and your departmental programming. So without further ado, we'll get that going, and we will come back together just for a few minutes right at the end of the hour. Did we all make it back? I think that was a success. And I
I
hope
think we
that
needed more time, Shauna.
I know. Hopefully conversations can happen after the fact if you connected well with somebody and have more questions. I'm sorry to cut any good conversations short. I know that happened in our room as well. It seems to be inevitable on Zoom. But I just wanted to give us a chance to wrap up here for a few quick minutes. And first of all, to ask Catherine to put in the chat, we have a very brief post-event evaluation that she'll link there, and you can take it now. I'll also send that out via email, but we appreciate your feedback on that. I wanted to just close with sort of bringing us full circle in terms of our ideals framing for today. Hopefully, as you talked about, making the case for this work on your own campus or specific strategies for doing interfaith work in different curricular spaces. I wanted to just tie that back to our ideal study and say that this research has been really the first of its kind in this scope. And so we hope that it might provide a useful tool for you as you're making the case, perhaps to colleagues or administrators on your campuses, to say, these are the experiences students are having, and these are ways that we can prompt more growth in their interfaith competencies and inclinations. And I'm happy to have that conversation with anybody who would like to chat in more detail about the ideals research that we've done. We also pair our findings with a series of recommendations for practice, which are more broad-based, but I think still have a lot of utility in terms of giving some direction on where to go from here. So in the case of looking for sort of steps forward, we hope that that might also prove useful. And the last thing I just want to note, of course, and those of you who have been part of our network before know this, but just to remind you that Interfaith Youth Corps has a tremendous wealth of resources on work with faculty as well. And Carolyn is on the call here today and is our point person for that. But please don't hesitate to reach out if you're looking for specific, I'm having a little tongue-tied problem today, specific resources in your particular field for assessing work in the classroom. If you want to sort of talk through strategies that are new, we are very happy to support you in that work. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And I will send out a follow-up email with, again, with our survey, but also we'll be sharing this recording. So if you have other colleagues or professional networks with whom you want to share today's session, we hope that you do that and spread the word and the good ideas that were engendered here today. So really grateful to have you all. I know this is a busy time of year as people are wrapping up, and we're really, really grateful that you took the time to be with us. So with that, I will let you all go and wish you a great afternoon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.